Is it time for Brant Clarke to be a full-time NHL player? That and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all their customers with boosts and bonuses daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Coming up on today's show, we have had the Stanley Cup been awarded, and we're going to look back on the Kings' first trip to the Stanley Cup Final. But we start with the Kings' future and maybe their immediate future with young standout defenseman Brandt Clarke. The 21-year-old was the Kings' first-round selection, 8th overall back in 2021. After a solid junior career, he made the move to be a full-time pro last season with the Ontario Reign, but he also already had a handful of NHL games under his belt. He played 9 games for the Kings in the 2022-23 season. That was before the Kings decided to send him back to his junior team, and that was also after the Kings had him play a 9-game conditioning stint with the Ontario Reign to get him as much seasoning as possible. And then he played 16 games for the Kings last season before joining the Ontario Reign, where he played for 50 games. The 6'2", 200-pound defenseman finished with 10 goals and 36 assists for 46 points in his first full AHL season. Clarke was 5th in the AHL in assists and points, despite playing 12 fewer games than the other defensemen that he was going head-to-head against. Again, that was he was 5th in assists and points amongst defensemen in the AHL. He was the leading rookie defenseman when it came to assists and points, and he was 3rd in goal scoring amongst rookie defensemen. For that, he was named to the All-AHL rookie team. He was named to the 2nd All-Star squad and was also named to the AHL's All-Prospects team. In his 25 games in the NHL, he's got 2 goals and 6 assists for 8 points spread out over 2 seasons. His first NHL goal, though, came last season and was one of the more memorable goals for the LA Kings all season long. In overtime in Boston, Clarke took a penalty, but as it expired, Philip Deneau threw a pass off the boards to Clarke, who took the puck, broke in all alone on a breakaway against the reigning Vezina Trophy winning goaltender Linus Ullmark, and scored on a beautiful move to end the game with his first career NHL goal. He clearly showed on that goal why Kings fans are so excited about Brandt Clarke's potential. He is the most exciting young defensive prospect the Kings have had, obviously, since Drew Doughty, who was drafted 2nd overall back in 2008. Drew went right into the NHL, never looked back, didn't play any games in the minor leagues, and has gone on to become the greatest defenseman in LA Kings history and a future Hall of Famer. Whether Brandt Clarke has something even close to that kind of career obviously remains to be seen. But again, there's no question he is kind of the next Drew Doughty type of player for the LA Kings. Drew probably with certainly a better defensive resume. Clarke, though, probably a little bit more of an offensive upside than Drew Doughty. But again, whether he has the longevity and the production and does all the things that Drew Doughty has done, that's certainly a big if. What isn't a big if is if Brandt Clarke is going to be a very good NHL player. But when is he going to be a full-time NHL player? And certainly there's a lot of hope that he can come in and be impactful in the near future. But can he be a real difference maker? I think that certainly is the hope. Can he do it right away? We'll see. I think that people need to be realistic. There's going to be a learning curve. But he is certainly, like I said, a playmaker. He's an offensive threat. He's something the Kings haven't had a lot of lately. Certainly Drew Doughty is a good all-around defenseman who has a good offensive side to his game. But you've got Mikey Anderson, you've got Vladislav Gavrikov, you've had Matt Roy. These are very defensive-minded defensemen. Brant Clarke obviously is more on the offensive side of things, and that's it's exciting when you have players who can be special offensively. Defense is important, and certainly it's going to continue to be important for the Kings, as Jim Hiller has said. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But again, you can find defensive defensemen. The guys who can do something offensively are the ones who, frankly, get paid the most money, are in line for the Norris trophies, and are the more exciting players in the NHL. Now, it seems like things are lining up for Brant Clarke to be a full-time NHL player this season. GM Rob Blake has said the Kings are interested in bringing back unrestricted free agent defenseman Matt Roy. And if that's the case, then that raises some questions. Are Jordan Spence and Brant Clarke going to be pushed into a more prominent role sooner rather than later? Certainly it depends on what the Kings do with Matt Roy. Speaking of Spence, he's a restricted free agent that still needs to be signed. He had his first full NHL season last year, did a respectable job, played 71 games for the Kings, had 22 assists, and was a +5 in his first full NHL season. Not spectacular, but again, for a rookie defenseman to come in, do the things he did, I thought it was very solid. And hopefully Jordan Spence will only get better going from here. Okay, so if the Kings decide to bring back Matt Roy, what does that mean for Brant Clarke? Well, I guess he could replace Jordan Spence on the third pairing on the right side. But then what do you do with Spence? I guess you could move him over to the left side, or you could trade him, or you could keep him for depth, have him be a healthy scratch on most nights. Or would you decide, if you do bring back Matt Roy, you keep Jordan Spence in the same position he was in this past season on the third pairing, and maybe you give Brant Clarke another season to kind of over-ripen in the AHL. Now, what if the Kings let Matt Roy go, which I think is the likely scenario? Then you've got two players ready to slide in to the vacancy that it brings up. You would either have Jordan Spence moving from the third pairing to the second pairing into the spot of Matt Roy. You could have Brant Clarke move into that second pairing and keep Jordan Spence where he is. So certainly that it seems like the Kings, if that's the case, they've got a contingency plan ready to go. Now, with the loss of Matt Roy, that is going to make the Kings less effective defensively. But you would think maybe with Jordan Spence playing a more prominent role, getting more minutes, with Brant Clarke coming in with his offensive upside, maybe the Kings also take another step forward offensively, which maybe could help offset things a bit as far as what they're losing. And who knows, maybe the Kings bring in another defenseman as well to play on the left side to help shore up things and mitigate the potential loss of Matt Roy. So we know that Brant Clarke has the offensive side. We know he's got good size. We know that he's a good skater. He's got pretty good speed. And he even has a bit of swagger to him, which I like, and kind of like Drew Doughty. And I think that should only get more and more prominent as he gets more confident with being an NHL player. Now, his defense is something that he's been working on. All the reports are that it has improved from his time in the AHL. But Jim Hiller has stressed that the Kings, while they are looking to be more offensive, and Brant Clarke could potentially help out with that, they are looking to still maintain their defensive identity. So for Brant Clarke, that's going to be something that's obviously going to be an adjustment at the NHL level. In his very limited sample size that he's had with the Kings, I thought he's been fine defensively. Again, it's not necessarily what his strong suit is, but there's not a lot of moments where you looked at him and you thought, boy, he is just a liability out there defensively. I thought he held his own pretty well. But look, playing defense in the NHL, things happen very quickly. You have to make split-second decisions on when to jump into a play, when to pinch, or when to play it safe and drop back and not take a chance. Those decisions, you can only learn how to do that by playing. There's going to be bumps in the road. There are going to be growing pains. That's just natural with any NHL player. That said, though, I think it's time for Brant Clarke to start to get that experience on a full-time basis. Come next season, like I said, I expect Matt Roy is going to be leaving, and I think it'll be time for Jordan Spence and Brandt Clarke to take on a more prominent role with the LA Kings. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see if that happens or not. But again, excited to see what Brant Clark can turn into, excited to see him grow and develop, and hopefully in the end be what all of us think he can be. And that is a very special playmaking offensive defenseman for the LA Kings. By the way, Brant Clark not going to be considered a rookie next season if in fact he is a full-time member of the LA Kings, so he would be ineligible for the Rookie of the Year for the Calder Trophy. Now, a player must not have played more than 25 NHL games in any season. He hasn't. He's played exactly 25 games, so not more than 25. However, to be considered a rookie, you also can't have played in 6 or more NHL games in any 2 preceding seasons. Clark played 9 NHL games in the 2022-23 season, and then last year he played 16 NHL games. So unfortunately for Brant Clark, not going to be considered a rookie and would not be eligible for any kind of Rookie of the Year or any all-rookie type teams for the LA Kings, if in fact he does become a full-time member of the Kings next season. Well, the Stanley Cup was just handed out, and with that in mind, we look back at the Kings' first ever trip to the Stanley Cup Final. That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But with FanDuel, they let me keep sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up any bet that I'm in the mood for. You got baseball, golf, soccer, NASCAR, and it's never too early to get some bets down on how your favorite NFL team is going to do for the upcoming season. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, sports betting is not legal yet in California. However, you can still sign up at FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds, your favorite sport teams, and check out the Sportsbook app and get in on action with their free games that they have that's available. And you can still win real cash prizes. No matter where you are in the Golden State, there'll be plenty of options to back the underdog or the favorite when sports betting becomes available. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Well, the Florida Panthers beat the Edmonton Oilers 2-1 in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. I was very happy to see that. I was rooting hard for the Florida Panthers to prevent the Edmonton Oilers from winning the Stanley Cup. That, in fact, has happened. Maybe there were some of you out there who actually maybe wanted the Oilers to win the Stanley Cup so that you could say, well, at least we lost to the best team in hockey. I was not that guy. That was definitely not me. But because the Stanley Cup has been awarded, we did see the LA Kings stay in the record books. Now, what am I talking about? Well, there was one positive stat and there was one potentially negative stat. We'll start with the positive. Now, the Oilers were down 3-0 in the series against Florida. They were looking to come all the way back and win 4 straight games to capture the Stanley Cup. Now, the last team that was down 3-0 in a playoff series and came all the way back to win was, of course, the Los Angeles Kings. They were down 3-0 in the first round of the playoffs in 2014 to the San Jose Sharks, won 4 in a row, including the Game 7 in San Jose, on their way to winning the 2014 Stanley Cup. So cool to see that the LA Kings are still the last team in the NHL to rally down 3-0 to win a playoff series. The Oilers did not accomplish that. However, there's also a negative because the Oilers didn't win the Stanley Cup, and that would be that there has not been a Canadian-based NHL team that has won the Stanley Cup in 31 years. The Oilers have lost twice in that span. The Canucks have lost twice. The Senators, Flames, and Canadians have each lost once. So that means that the last American-based team to lose to a Canadian-based team in the Stanley Cup Final is, in fact, the Los Angeles Kings in 1993 when they lost in 5 games to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, I want to do a little bit of a historical look back on that team. That team is very near and dear to my heart. When Wayne Gretzky came to LA, it got a lot of interest from non-hockey fans, including me. And, I had certainly heard of the Great One, but I was more of an NBA fan. I was a big fan of the Showtime Lakers. Magic Johnson's one of my all-time favorite athletes. But when Wayne Gretzky came to LA, I got interested. I was curious. And I still wasn't a full-time Kings fan until that 1993 season. Now, I had dabbled with hockey and the Kings a little bit. I had watched some games here and there. But for whatever reason, I decided that season I was going all in on the Kings. I was going to watch every game I could. I was going to learn all the players, and I was going to really get into hockey. Well, little did I know the Kings would have an unexpected run to the Stanley Cup Final, their first appearance in the final in franchise history. Now, they had existed 25 years before that season, and they were never really close to making it into the final. Even when they were an original expansion franchise and there were only 12 teams in the entire league, they still didn't get close to the Stanley Cup Final. The closest the Kings ever got to the Stanley Cup Final before 93 was their second year in the league, 1969, when they made it to the conference final. However, they didn't win a single game in that conference final matchup against the St. Louis Blues. They were swept in 4 games. The 1992-93 season was Wayne Gretzky's 5th in Los Angeles, but there wasn't a lot of postseason success. Yes, the Kings did make the playoffs every year that Wayne Gretzky was there over those first 5 years, but they never made it out of the second round. The 1992-93 season, the great one, only played 45 regular season games due to injury. Because of that, it was his worst regular season statistically by far. But the Kings, led by Luc Robitaille's 63 goals and 125 points, finished third in the old Smythe division with 95 points. The Kings would end up playing all Canadian teams in their road to the Stanley Cup Final. Round 1, they took out the Calgary Flames 4-2. Round 2, they took out the Vancouver Canucks 4-2. Round 3 in the Western Conference Finals, they beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in 7 games. Yes, the Toronto Maple Leafs back then were in the Western Conference. And that Game 7 at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, Wayne Gretzky has said, was the greatest game he ever played. He had a hat trick in Toronto in Game 7, and the Kings pulled out a 5-4 victory to advance to their first ever Stanley Cup Final. I still remember watching those games and how I came to hate Leafs players like Doug Gilmour and Wendell Clark. Well, unfortunately, the Kings did take on one more Canadian team in the final, and that was the Montreal Canadiens, which they lost to in 5 games. But the series was a lot closer than you would think, with it only lasting 5 games. The Kings should have been up 2-0 heading home, and I am convinced if that had happened, the Kings would have won their first Stanley Cup. However, as you probably know, because it is a legendary story now, in Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final in Montreal, the Kings were up 2-1 late, under 2 minutes to go, when Canadiens head coach Jacques Demers called for a stick measurement, which I honestly don't even know that they do anymore. I cannot remember the last time I saw a coach measure for an illegal stick to try and get a power play. But back then it was something that was done occasionally. Even then, I don't think it was done that often, because there was the rule, if you measured a stick and it ended up being legal, then your team would be shorthanded. Anyway, the stick of Kings forward Marty McSorley did have an illegal curve, and it gave Montreal a power play. The Canadiens would pull goalie Patrick Waugh for a 6-on-4 advantage, and Eric Desjardins would score with 32 seconds left to tie up the game and send it to overtime. And in the overtime, Desjardins would complete a hat trick, and Montreal would pull out the 3-2 win to even the series at 1-1. That was a devastating loss for the Kings. Is that a cheesy way to get a power play and end up winning a game? Absolutely. Should Marty McSorley have been smart enough to not be playing with an illegal stick, especially when you're up by 1 goal in the 3rd period in the Stanley Cup Final? Yes, he should have been. But that's all history now. The Kings would go on to lose the next 2 games at home, both in overtime, and then eventually bow out in 5 games in Montreal. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say I was heartbroken over what had happened, especially because it was just my first year of really being a Kings fan, but I certainly was disappointed. And to this day, curse the name of Jacques Demers and the Montreal Canadiens. However, watching that entire run of the LA Kings to the Stanley Cup Final, and experiencing what playoff hockey was all about, it really sold me on the Kings and sold me that hockey was a sport that I wanted to invest in and really become a fan of for the rest of my life. And I have. I transitioned away from the Lakers. I can't even tell you the last time I watched an NBA game, and went to the Kings and have never looked back. And I've been relatively happy ever since. Now, after that season, I finally did get a better idea of what it was like to be a Kings fan, because the Kings would not return to the Stanley Cup Final for 19 years. And over that span, they only had one playoff series win. But in the end, the wait was worth it, with the Kings winning 2 Stanley Cup titles in a span of 2 seasons. I certainly hope we don't have to wait another 19 years for the Kings to get back to the final once again. But that 1992-93 season, again, very special to me. It's unfortunate the Kings are still known right now as the last American team to lose to a Canadian team in the Stanley Cup Final, but it was still a special season for me as a Kings fan. Fun fact from the 1992-93 season, current Kings head coach Jim Hiller was on that team in 92-93. However, he was traded during the season along with Paul Coffey and Sylvain Couturier to the Detroit Red Wings for Jimmy Carson, Mark Potvin, and Gary Shuchuk. We have a former LA Kings player going into the Hall of Fame. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. They make choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million in coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from America's top insurers with just a couple of clicks. Policy Genius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. They have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google, Trustpilot, and from customers that found the best fit for their needs. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance for you with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. I wanted to quickly clarify something that I said on Monday's show when I was talking about how the Kings were, if they were looking to buy out Pierre-Luc Dubois, how that wasn't going to be an option because of when the NHL season actually came to an end. I had said that when Pierre-Luc Dubois turned 26, which he did on Monday, the Kings were not going to be able to buy him out. That's actually incorrect. The Kings would not have been able to buy him out for 1/3 of the remaining portion on his contract. It would have saved the Kings $31.6 million, which was by far and away the more favorable option of the two options the Kings could have had for a buyout. Now, as it turned out, again, it wasn't an option for the Kings because of when the Stanley Cup Final ended. It didn't end until Pierre-Luc Dubois turned 26, and so that 1/3 buyout option was off the table. Which probably meant a buyout was off the table. Now, the Kings could have, though, still bought out Pierre-Luc Dubois for 2/3 of the remainder on his contract, which was the far less favorable option and probably meant the Kings wouldn't have done it if they were even thinking about doing it to begin with. So a little bit of clarity on what I was talking about. The 1/3 remaining on the contract option of the buyout had to happen before he turned 26, which they couldn't have bought him out because, again, the season didn't end until the 24th. So it wasn't an issue, but I hope I clarified that a little bit there. The Kings could have still bought him out, but it wouldn't have been for 1/3 remaining on the contract. It would have been for 2/3. And that really wasn't probably a good option for the LA Kings in hindsight, but it doesn't matter. They traded him, and that's that. I did see some news that a former King, I thought about doing a Name That King, but I didn't end up doing it, but it's a little game that we've played occasionally when a former King is in the news. But a former LA Kings player was voted as the latest class of the Hockey Hall of Fame, which was announced today. Now, you may not even really remember that he was an LA King, but in fact, Jeremy Roenick is going into the Hockey Hall of Fame, not based, though, on what he did with the Los Angeles Kings, where he played one season in LA. And frankly, it was a season to forget. As I remember, he came in out of shape. He was constantly injured that season, and it was his worst statistical season since his rookie year. It was basically the beginning of the end of a good career for Jeremy Roenick. He was certainly skilled and tough and a very productive player early in his career with the Chicago Blackhawks and the Philadelphia Flyers. And it seemed like he was coming to LA to kind of parlay his big personality into some kind of acting career after hockey. That didn't exactly work out, despite his amazing performance in the Ghost Whisperer as the softball coach, or his security guard role in the television show Leverage. But with all due respect, with his time in LA, not very impressive. Jeremy Roenick obviously had a Hall of Fame career, 1,216 points in 1,363 games, the fourth most for any U.S.-born player. When he was in LA, he was doing disco dancing on the ice during stoppages in play. That was the highlight of his career with the Kings. But he obviously had a lot more highlights in his times in Chicago and Philadelphia. So former LA King for one season, Jeremy Roenick is going into the Hockey Hall of Fame. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, friend of the show, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty is going to stop by. We're going to talk about the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. We're going to talk about the NHL draft coming up, free agency as well. Friday, as always, we'll have our fan feedback show, your thoughts on anything going on with the LA Kings, including the upcoming draft. We'd love to hear from you on that. And our show on Friday will be done after the draft. So we will be reacting, breaking down, giving you a scouting report on the Kings' first-round pick, if, of course, they keep it. They have the 21st selection in this year's NHL entry draft. You want to get an email in for the feedback show? It's lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always leave your comments in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube. Stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.